Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this Tuesday night. We are, or sorry, you are in the Fair Housing Deep Dive for renters' rights and responsibilities for tenants and rental home seekers. So if that's where you were expecting to be tonight, you are in the right place. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started here. Just to let you guys all know, we cannot hear or see you, so your microphones are automatically off, your cameras are off, so we cannot communicate with you just via the chat or the Q&A. So with that, please use the Q&A to send clarifying questions about the content during the training. And then at the end, we'll have some time for more detailed questions. And then if it's extremely detailed, our contact information is available as well. So feel free to contact us after so we can continue to discuss if there's some more scenario type questions. Evaluation should come up automatically in your browser, and you can request certificates in there if you wish. To get a certificate, you must complete it by April 30th, so tomorrow at 5 p.m. This training is also being recorded and will be made available online, and that will be sent to you via email. So yeah, let's get started. My name is Brianna Miranda, and I am one of two education outreach coordinators. The other education outreach coordinator, Lindsay Owens, is behind the scenes right now. So if you're having any issues, they did email everyone the handouts today. So you have their email, so please reach out to them if you're having issues getting online today. Also, with that being said, if you did not receive any handouts, they did come from Lindsay Owens, L. Owens at FHCWM.org. So please check your emails for those. If not, you can request those or put your email in the chat so Lindsay can send it to you. In addition, this wonderful training is sponsored by the Michigan State Housing Development Authority, or MISTA. We also have other trainings available online on our website through MISTA and some that have been recorded. So please check those out online. So what are we going to talk about today? We'll talk about what is fair housing, who is protected. We'll talk about some new source of income protections that came online this year, this month actually, in Michigan. We'll cover some state of fair housing, criminal background screening, harassment, protections for people with disabilities, protections for families with children, how to report and file a complaint, including testing, and then, end it with some questions. So who are we? The Fair Housing Center of West Michigan, or FHCWM. Our mission is to prevent and eliminate illegal housing discrimination, ensure equal housing opportunity, and to promote inclusive communities. We do this through a few different ways, but the two biggest ways are by accepting investigations or of allegations. Sorry, I said that wrong. By accepting allegations and then conducting investigations once we get those allegations. Then we also provide education, which I'm currently doing to you all or to the industry. So we want to ensure that the industry knows best practices and ways to follow the law. And then we want home seekers to know the law. We were also founded in 1980 as a private nonprofit organization. And we have been operating as such since then. We cannot provide legal advice. We have no attorneys on staff, and all information today and all information we provide is for educational purposes only. Additionally, as a disclaimer, all information is current and to the best of our knowledge, and it can change at any time. So some things that we don't do, because fair is very subjective. Fair has a lot of meanings, and especially with housing, there's a lot of unfair things that are occurring, but we only focus on one subset of the law, which I'll go over in a few moments here. But some things that we do not do, we do not handle landlord-tenant matters or law. We don't handle building code or maintenance issues. We don't teach homebuyer classes or credit counseling. We don't strictly work on affordable housing issues. However, they can be interwoven with fair housing. No foreclosure prevention, and we do not offer housing or refer to housing, since part of what our work is investigating housing to ensure that there is no discrimination occurring. So why does equal housing matter? Well, housing is kind of, as you see on the slide here, is the center of everything. It's how we have access to our education systems, or no access to transit, healthcare systems, the ability to have wealth and jobs. So here we're located in Grand Rapids. I would say it's a really great community for those reasons because we have access to all of these things. And so being able to choose that is really important because it affects every aspect of your life and what's important to you, what do you prioritize, and discrimination should not be a factor when finding housing. Here are some additional fair housing centers. We are located in West Michigan, on the map here, and we are located in Kent County, if folks are not from this community. And we serve, as you can see, all of the teal there. Additionally, we also serve the orange in aspects when it comes to housing provider education. So the Orange Center can help advocates and clients where they do not provide education to the housing industry. So yeah, that is all the fair housing centers that are in Michigan. So that would be your fair housing center to call if you find housing discrimination in your community. So I have a poll to start us out here to get us moving. So I have an understanding of where everyone kind of falls when it comes to your fair housing knowledge. So on a scale of 1 to 5, please rate your level of familiarity with fair housing, with 1 being I am new, 3 being I have some knowledge, and 5, no, I have a lot of knowledge, and you could join me right here and teach with me. I'll give a few moments here for everyone to respond. Alrighty, I'll give about 10-ish seconds for people to let me know if they're new, have some knowledge, or know a lot about fair housing. All right. I'll share the results for you guys to know who is all here in the space with us. So it is a really mixed bag, but I would say leaning more on some people are familiar, but there are some new people here. So I will ensure that I'm trying to explain things to the best for the new people to understand, but please put questions in the Q&A, clarifying questions, and Lindsay will pop on to ask me, or we'll take them at the end. We have another poll here. Is this a fair housing issue? I know we haven't really talked about it, but we have some folks that are familiar. So I'm curious to see if people see the fair housing issue or not. So the first one there is an ad states ABC Apartments has 1 and 2 bedroom units available near shops, restaurants, and New York City Park. First month rent and security deposit required. Credit check and rental references required. All units have air conditioning. Is this a fair housing issue, this ad here? Yes or no? The second one, an older adult is contacted by a senior housing provider because their name came up on a waiting list. The manager wants to see the applicant in person to evaluate if they are healthy and fit enough to live on the property. Is that a fair housing issue? And I'll give about 30 seconds or so, depending on how the answers are coming in, for folks to answer these questions. All right, about 10 more seconds here. So if you're struggling, also all responses are anonymous. So please choose the best to your knowledge. All right, I'm going to end this poll. So for the first one, 79% of you are correct. There was no fair housing issue with that ad. It very much just stated the boilerplate kind of information that we would find about an apartment and the information about the apartment. So that was a no fair housing issues there. The second one, that 87% of you were correct there. So there is some fair housing issues that we see in a situation like this. Evaluating a person, especially for independent living, which we don't see that information is not provided in here. So we just said a senior housing provider. However, we did not say assisted living or nursing home or those keywords to say that there is a service that is connected with the housing. So when it's independent living and seniors, there really should be no evaluation to see if they're healthy or fit enough to live independently. So if you are working with clients and seniors who may be saying that, oh, I applied somewhere and they want to evaluate me and it's independent living, definitely call our office or your local fair housing center. All right, we will move on with some content here. Now that I got you guys all working and thinking, we'll go over what fair housing is. So, fair housing, it is the right to choose housing free from unlawful discrimination. This is determined by protected classes under federal, state, and local fair housing laws. It protects against discrimination in any type of housing transaction. This includes rentals, sales, and lending and insurance, but some additional ones that folks may not think about is zoning and land use. So if a piece of land is intended for housing, then it is protected. So any type of housing transaction, fair housing does protect. So what are the protected classes? We have different levels here. So federally, this is across the nation. These are the protections outlined in the Federal Fair Housing Act. Race, color, so skin color, national origin, so where somebody is from, sex, religion, disability status, which is both mental and physical disabilities, and familial status, which is the presence of children under the age of 18 in the home. And then for federal housing, HUD housing, HUD subsidized housing, there's additional protections under the Equal Access Rule, which includes marital status, sexual orientation, gender identity, and then the composition of family and age. And then those links right there can get you to that Equal Access Rule in 2012 and 2016. And then at the Michigan level, we have additional protected classes in addition to the ones I just listed. Marital status is one. So whether you're married, single, divorced, separated, that should not change whether or not you can rent a home or buy a home. Age is also protected, so anybody that can enter a legal contract, so over the age of 18 or legally emancipated. There are some exceptions for this when it comes to senior housing. So that's 55 and older housing or 62 and older housing. And then newly, we have sexual orientation and gender identity or expression that were added to the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act, which is which covers fair housing and the protected classes. That was added and went into effect last year. And then newly this month, on April 2nd, source of income is now protected in Michigan, and that is with rental housing only. And we'll go over that in a little bit. Here. And then locally, it really depends. So you really need to check with your city, your township, your village office. There are some links there to kind of search your city and see if there's a code or any kind of act on there that, prohibits discrimination any further. So in talking about source of income that's now protected across Michigan, previously, before April 2nd, it was protected in some cities across the state. And in our service area, that included Grand Rapids, Kentwood, Wyoming, and Holland. So some cities have additional protections, and so you need to make sure that you're checking those, especially if you are, moving to a new city and you just want to know what protections are available to you. And for housing providers, just knowing where the unit is, that also helps with, knowing that there's additional protections that you need to be aware of. I know Ann Arbor has a lot more protections than the city of Grand Rapids, but the city of Grand Rapids has additional protections as well. So looking at the federal fair housing laws, there kind of have been laws in place since 1866. So the Civil Rights Act of 1866 stated all persons in the United States have the same rights as white persons. So that is still in effect, today. That's still a thing. So all people in the United States have the same rights. And then in the Civil Rights Act of 1870, it furthered that to say all persons have full and equal benefit of all laws as enjoyed by white citizens. So they keep adding and building on each other. Then we get the Fair Housing Act, the Civil Rights Act of 1968, which called out race, color, religion, and national origin. However, it did not change the protections under the Reconstruction Act. So these kind of all are building on each other. Then in 1974, we get the prohibition against discriminating based upon sex. And then in 1988, we have additional protections added for family status and disability status. Then looking at the Michigan fair housing laws, the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act of 1976 added protections for marital status, age, sexual orientation, gender identity expression, and source of income in rental housing only as of 4/2. It also added, when we added the, not we, but when the state added sexual orientation and gender and identity and expression. In addition to that, the Crown Act was included to define race further. It includes that race includes hairstyles that are associated with race and hair texture and protective hairstyles. So those, if somebody is being discriminated against because of their hair and it's associated with a race, then that would be protected under race in Michigan. And as mentioned, we now have these source of income protections, which amended the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act and the Landlord Tenant Act. And this went into effect on April 2nd. It defines source of income to include benefits or subsidy programs such as housing assistance, vouchers, public assistance, Social Security, SSI, other programs that are administered by any federal, state, local, or nonprofit entity. So that last piece really captures anything that isn't outlined here. It's really anything, any money that could be coming from the federal, state, from the from the federal government, the state government, or local government, or a nonprofit entity. That all should be included as a source of income, and somebody should not be denied or treated differently because they have a different source of income. Additionally, this protection applies to landlords. So anybody that is because I said it's rental housing only. So, it's not in the sale or insurance, kind of all the other phases of the housing transaction that I mentioned earlier. For source of income, it's only rental and it only applies to landlords. But their definition of landlord includes anybody whose leases or subleases or is authorized to exercise any aspect of the management company or acts as a rental agent or receives rent. So it really captures anybody that's involved in that process, that transaction. So oftentimes we see landlords have multiple LLCs, and if they have one LLC and that has one LLC and then they have another LLC, they're all of those LLCs make them a landlord. And then there is a exemption additionally to that, which includes for small landlords with fewer than 5 units, and uh, that includes all of their LLCs. So if they have an LLC with 4 units and another one with four, they have 8 units in total, and they're not exempt. However, in addition to these protection, a landlord would still be allowed to require a certain income amount to rent a unit, but they can't specify the said source of income. So landlords are still allowed to say you have to make X amount of money, 3 times the rent. But they can't say that you can't make or that they can't take your voucher and whatever income you have. Also, the source of income needs to be legal and ongoing, and it cannot be derived from any type of illegal manner. Additionally to this, it does call out that housing agencies have to handle vouchers within 30 days or that protection kind of goes away. This is a new protection, and we're still learning about what this would entail. So any questions on this, we may not know as of right now because case law needs to develop to kind of show some harm or show behaviors that may become of source of income protections. But these are some of the things that is called out in the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act and in the amendments that are prohibited behaviors. So there may be some situations that are really nuanced that may not be covered here, and that's okay, and that's something that we're willing to learn from. And so if you have questions that are more specific, please reach out to us. We just may not have a perfect answer for you yet as we're still learning. But with that being said, prohibited behavior is because of someone's source of income. So you cannot deny somebody or terminate a lease because of their source of income. There can't be any difference in changes or difference in prices, terms, conditions, privileges, fees, facilities, services that are in connection with the unit. Those cannot your source of income cannot change any of those things. So because you receive a voucher, doesn't mean that the price increases. It doesn't mean that you don't get access to this facility. If there's a pool and you're a voucher holder, you still get that access to that pool because it's connected to the unit. The unit has to be made available unless the tenant is otherwise ineligible. The units have to be represented and made knowingly. You can't say that these units aren't available because of someone's source of income. You can't discourage any rentals. And landlords cannot publish any ads or make statements about a preference or a limit. So ads that say we don't accept incomes like this or vouchers, that is now protected. And that is now that now goes against fair housing. In general, language referring to a person's occupation, lack of occupation or employment, or receipt of government assistance really could trigger a liability. And some additional things that weren't called out in the specific definition, but alimony is covered, child support, Social Security payments, those all come from government entities or nonprofit entities. So those are covered as sources of income. Additionally, as I mentioned, some local communities have that protection as well, and they may outline additional sources of income that may not be listed, or they may have additional liabilities when it comes to their source of income protection. So it's always important to know your local law and your local protections. So I talked about that any part of the housing transaction is covered, but thinking more specifically, what types of housing? Not, we think of housing, you think of a single family home or an apartment, but there are additional protection or different additional housing types that are protected. So, condos are a big condo associations and homeowner associations. Those folks still need to abide by fair housing laws. So, if you belong to a homeowners association or condo association and you see the lease or the community rules and it calls out any of the protected classes, sometimes it's about usually what we've seen is occupancy or kids on the property, things like that. But another one we see is disability related discrimination with condo associations, not allowing a ramp to be built in the front because of the aesthetics and the uniformity of the community that would change that. While a person with a disability needs those, and condo associations have to allow that modification to be done. Mobile homes, manufactured homes are also covered. Rooming houses, transitional housing, and homeless shelters, college residents, cooperatives, and public housing authorities. This is just a small list, but it kind of keeps going. Anything that's intended for housing or can be defined as a unit or dwelling is covered. So a dwelling, if you receive mail there, if you can receive mail there, if the intention is to return there at the end of the night, that is protected or included. So the protections that I listed a few slides ago are the only groups that are specifically listed and enjoy protection under fair housing laws. Some other protections or some other classes of people that we hear about are people with different credit history that's not protected, past criminal history, but we will go kind of deeper into that, how those folks still could be protected. Total amount of income is not protected, and tattoos. Additionally, people that are unhoused or have homeless status are not protected classes. There may be local protections, but again, you need to check that. Additionally, HUD has other programs that provide preferences for unhoused population, so that's something to be thinking, knowing, or as well as you're kind of thinking about the different housing that you may interact with for clients or the people in your life or yourself. So now we're going to move into the state of fair housing. So 83% of national fair housing complaints take place in the rental process. So we do heavily, when we talk about fair housing, often it is in reference to rentals. That's just because that is where complaints are coming from. As you can see here, this graphic was provided by the National Fair Housing Alliance, and this was their transactions in 2023. But as you can see, rental was extremely high comparatively to the other categories. But it happens across the board here. You can see, 2% was sales. There was some harassment there, almost 5% or 4.5%. So there's the HOA and condo that I talked about, and then other additional types of complaints. But you can find this on NAFA's website if you're interested in reading more about it. Then looking at our allegations, so knowing that blue map earlier, that's across our service area, and this was in 2024, we had over 300 people call us and make allegations on potential discrimination happening in their community. We went forward with 168 of those allegations and turned those into cases. But 300 people did call us, over 300 people called us last year to report some type of discrimination. However, based on what we can do and our process, we were only able to go forward with 168 of those. That really could be varying reasons. It could be that there wasn't evidence that we could obtain because we are a private nonprofit. We are not an enforcement entity, so we cannot force a housing provider to give us their financials or give us certain information. The Michigan Department of Civil Rights has more of that enforcement power. Additionally, as we all know, we've moved in the past. Moving is a very stressful process. So somebody may experience discrimination, may report it, but then they don't follow up because they have other things going on. And oftentimes we have to close those cases because we don't have additional information to continue those. So there's varying reasons, but there still was, over 160, almost 170 allegations that we were able to move forward with of discrimination. And this is kind of the breakdown. And disability status is our number one allegation of discrimination that we've experienced for about 10 years now, followed by race and color. And then this year was surprisingly, there was an uptick in national origin cases. There was 23 of those. Traditionally and in the past, familial status has been one of our top three. But that is kind of the breakdown that you can see there for our 2024 caseload. You can also read more about that in our annual report if that is something that interests you. You can find that on our online. Now, looking at transaction type, our data also shows that rental transactions have the highest cases that we receive, followed by reasonable accommodations, which is a change in policy for a person with a disability, which I will dive deeper into, but that is our second most highest caseload transaction is reasonable accommodations. And then you can kind of see the rest of those kind of spewed up there. We did have some higher cases in mortgage and harassment as well. So when thinking of how this law applies, the biggest thing to be thinking about is that if there is a difference in treatment, that is the biggest thing that we're looking for. Is there a difference in treatment because of someone's disability, because of someone's race? That is what fair housing is about, is because of this protected class, you were treated differently, either denied or while in the housing treated differently. If that's one thing I can have everyone take away from today, it's that fair housing really protects that difference in treatment because of a protected class. You're treated differently because of those things. It does require that each person be treated equally, regardless of the protected classes, and that the key when we are teaching housing providers is that every person needs to be consistently provided equal treatment and given equal information. There are exceptions when it comes to persons with disabilities, which I will dive into toward the end here. So here are some examples that you may have heard of or seen of that would be fair housing violations. A landlord who tells someone they have too many people or too many children to rent a house or apartment. There are reasonable occupancy standards, which I will also go into toward the end of this presentation. But that is definitely a red flag for us when landlords point out too many children or too many people in the household. If somebody's experiencing sexual harassment from their landlord, that is covered by fair housing. Someone who needs help getting permission for a ramp because of a disability. Someone who needs help getting permission for a live-in aid or emotional support animal. A landlord who may have a no felonies policy that has some fair housing concerns, blanket bans. A landlord that will not rent to families with children on an upper floor. That, all housing needs to be made equally available. So if there is a second floor unit, that family needs to be made aware of that. It is up to the family to decide what space is best for them. Fair housing is all about equal opportunity. What is illegal under fair housing? These are differences that we've seen. There's differences in advertising, steering, which means recommending or pushing somebody towards a certain community or a different area because of a protected class. Eligibility criteria may be different because of a protected class. The application or the process, policies, terms, and conditions, discounts or specials, maintenance, access to the amenities that are affiliated with the housing, and harassment, which includes sexual harassment and if there's intimidation. If you are working on an application or working with a client on an application, it's really important to be looking at the application and reviewing it with what is relevant and what is objectively determining whether or not this person can live there or if I can live there. Questions, there should not really be questions on the application that would not help make the decision if the person could live there, if that makes sense. What is necessary to say, what is necessary in an application? You really just need to know, does the person make enough money? Are they safe to live here? Um, there's other things, but kind of thinking of that level of appropriate questions. You really shouldn't be asking about their family makeup other than like who's going to be living in the home. You really shouldn't be asking about a housing provider should not be asking about you know, anniversaries or birth dates if it's not relevant to the application. Those types of things would be something that we would want to look further into. Not to say it's really it's immediately a bad thing, but we would look further into that to say, why are you asking this information? Could this information be used in a negative way to say a person can or cannot live here? So I have another poll before we move on. So you are looking for housing for your family when you notice an advertisement that includes the phrases perfect for couples and no felonies. Who do you call? The United Way or 211, Legal Aid, your city or county of government, Urban League or a equivalent tenants' rights organization, Fair Housing Center, or disability advocates or a disability network. Just a reminder, if you have questions, please place them in the Q&A so that we can answer them. Questions in the chat will get lost. All right. I'm going to give folks about 5 to 10 more seconds. I think it's slowed down in answering. Again, there's no there's no grading or anything like that, so do not worry about getting it right. All right. So 94% of you are correct. Please call our office if you find, or a fair housing center, if you see an advertisement that kind of contains any of those phrases. So perfect for couples really creates a idea that you do not want families with children there, or a housing provider does not want a housing with children there. And then no felonies, again, blanket bans are really bad because it does not look at, doesn't take the individualized assessment, which HUD requires, which we will go into. So moving into criminal background screening, there are a few guidances from HUD. The first one, which is linked there, is for public housing authorities. And then there are two that were issued, one in 2016 and then one in 2022. The 2022 really evaluates, it really helps housing providers evaluate applicants with a criminal record in private housing. Having a criminal record is not a protected characteristic or a protected class. However, as data shows, 100 million or a third of the US population have some sort of criminal record. So this affects a lot of people, which is why it's something we cover, and it's why we are have additional information and are covering it today. So the additional guidance in 2022 cites research that says criminal history is not a good predictor of housing success. It further states that providers shouldn't really consider using it to screen for tenants. They really should concentrate on, again, if somebody can afford it, do their credit meet the criteria? So there's other criteria, and then kind of looking at that criminal history. It really any policies that should that policies that are in place should focus on risk to resident safety and or property. Was the criminal history a risk to resident safety or property? Was it a fraudulent charge or tax evasion? Those types of things, yes, they are crimes, but it's not really, you're not worried about your property getting damaged or the other residents being harmed. It should additionally look at the nature of it, the severity of it, and the recency of convictions. The policies should not look at arrests, and they should not have any blanket bans. A individual assessment is kind of the best policy to have, is looking at each person and their criminal history and kind of assessing is there a risk to resident safety or property? How long ago was it? That's a big one. If they haven't committed a crime in 10 years, there really is no evidence to say there is really no demonstrable risk there, because they haven't committed any additional crimes. It can exclude if they were convicted of illegal drug manufacturing or distribution, though. So with criminal background, a big part of it is having a disparate treatment. So not all applicants are being advertised to. It's not applied to all applicants. Where some comparable applicants are one is rejected and the other one isn't, and it's kind of race was the only factor that would be disparate treatment. So this would be illegal. If somebody was denied and they have this, they have a similar criminal background as another person that applied, and the only difference is their race, that would have some fair housing concern. If people are discouraged, especially protected applicants, if it's based on a protected class and those folks are discouraged, and others are encouraged, or offering applications to some people and not others, or withholding applications from others, based on that protected class because of a criminal background, that would be definitely something that we would have concern with. And then looking at the 2015 HUD guidance for public housing agencies, that policy does outline that housing agencies must deny anyone convicted of manufacturing meth on the federal property if they're on the lifetime sex offense registry, alcohol abusers, really anyone convicted for drug-related activity within the last 3 years, unless they have rehabilitation or circumstances that no longer exist. So again, the guidance of the public housing also kind of has you looking at the individual and the criminal background to see, if there is rehabilitation happening or other circumstances that are not present to make that person commit the crime again. Additionally, public housing agencies may deny for drug-related or violent criminal activity or other things that may affect health, safety, and peaceful enjoyment. Oftentimes we hear that they have to have a one strike policy for public housing agencies. That is not required. So that is not required under HUD guidance. So moving in to harassment. Harassment, the Fair Housing Act prohibits coercion, imitation, threats, or interference with any person who exercises or enjoys their rights. This includes harassment because of race or national origin that would cause a person to vacate the unit, the dwelling, the space, or they abandon their efforts to secure the dwelling. So if harassment is occurring because of national origin or race, and the person doesn't want to live there anymore because of that, that would fall under fair housing. There are two types of harassment outlined, quid pro quo, which is this for that, and hostile environment harassment, which is we actually describe it in the next slide, so I'll wait a second here. And then retaliation is also covered. So if you enact your fair housing rights, you make a complaint, and the housing provider knows about it, they can't evict you, they can't stop working on any repairs. That would be retaliation, and that is also covered under fair housing. So that'd be like an additional thing to add to the complaint if you were uh, already in the process of making an allegation. Additionally, owners and property managers and the agents all can be held reliable for harassment, especially if they know about it and don't do anything about it. Tenants can also be held liable if they're harassing other tenants. We did provide a fact sheet in the handout, and I forgot to mention that for the criminal background. There is also a fact sheet provided in your handouts that has additional information on it, but I'm happy to answer any questions at the end here if there's more specific questions. Additionally, discrimination prohibited under the rule includes threatening, intimidating, as I mentioned, interfering with the enjoyment of their dwelling. If anyone is being denied or limited the uses or privileges or maintenance or repairs, as I mentioned as well. So again, it's just kind of the HUD rule continues to reinforce that a person can really not have their enjoyment taken from the dwelling, especially if it's threatening or intimidating behavior. Sorry, I thought we explained the two definitions, so I wanted to make sure that was in there before I went on. Sexual harassment in housing is also considered a form of sex discrimination and is legal under the Fair Housing Act. This includes unwelcome sexual advances, a request for sexual favors, as a or any other type of sexual conduct as a condition of maintaining the housing, obtaining it, or using any housing related services. And action must be taken to address it. That is the biggest thing here. If a housing provider does not knows about something that's happening, say it's a another employee and the manager knows about it and does not address it, that is really concerning for us as well. There are two types of sexual harassment in housing, that quid pro quo, and I talked this for that, a favor for a favor. So an example would be a landlord demands nude photos in return for approving a rental application. And then the hostile environment is really that intimidating, hostile, offensive behavior being present in a situation or in a housing that would make somebody not want to live there. An example of under sexual harassment would be a landlord subjecting a tenant to severe or pervasive unwelcome touching, kissing, or groping without their consent. We actually had a case that came out of Muskegon, and the individuals who reached out to us originally. Some of them had reached out to us for additional like information. They thought we did something else at our agency. And then upon our intake with them, we found out that they wanted to leave the home because their housing provider was sexually harassing them. Sexual harassment cases are very serious, and the DOJ generally is the entity, the Department of Justice, who takes them on. So after that incident in Muskegon, the person was no longer is allowed to um, act as a leasing agent or cannot be a landlord anymore. They have to go through a third party. And then additionally, there was um, some compensation for the victims and some fees that were paid out to the government for doing so. But there was over a dozen was women, I believe, that came forward as as we came up, as we heard from victims, and the information came out, more victims came forward as well. And that was dealt with. So it's really important to report these things because there may be other people that are experiencing them that may not know that there is an entity that can help them or may not realize that it is illegal. So I have another poll here, really putting you all to work tonight. So your parent tells you that they need grab bars in their bathroom, but the manager won't let them put the grab bars in. Who do you call? United Way 211, Legal Aid, City or County Government, Urban League, Tenants' Rights Organization, Fair Housing Center, or Disability Advocates, or a Disability Network. I'll give folks about 10 more seconds here. All right. So this was a good one. Um, it's a little bit of mix, but it's mostly Fair Housing Center. The Fair Housing Center, because they are not allowed to put them in their bathroom, that is because they need them because of a disability related need. That definitely is something that we would want to know. You could contact disability advocates. We do have a lot of good working relationships with our disability advocates and networks. So those folks would generally call us if they had that complaint. But the Fair Housing Center would definitely be the first call you make. And then we could have some support from disability advocates to help get those grab bars in if they have the ability to. So that puts us in to our next section, people with disabilities. So, under the Fair Housing Act, a person with a disability is defined as an individual with a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. And when we think about major life activities, it's really broadly construed to include anything that is from seeing, hearing, walking, breathing, performing manual tasks, caring for yourself, learning, speaking, anything that you do in your day-to-day life that you kind of need to survive, that would be considered a major life activity. Uh, Additionally, not only those who have those conditions, but also anybody who is regarded as having an impairment. So even if you are a person with uh, if you are not a person with a disability and you are denied or treated differently in housing because a person assumes you are or assumes you have a certain disability, then that would also be protected. There was a case once where a housing provider was in a housing provider, or sorry, a a man who had a physical disability was applying for a unit, and he went in and was talking with the housing provider, and the housing provider, they were just chatting, typical chatting, and the man shared about his disability and that it was something he had gotten in combat for being in a war overseas, and just talking about sharing his life story. And the woman at the housing provider, or the leasing agent, it was the leasing agent, ended up denying his application because she was worried that he would develop PTSD. He did not share that he had PTSD. He did not, make any note that he had PTSD, and he didn't have PTSD. But she denied him because of her biases and understanding of veterans and people that have been in combat. That's something that they can have. That's a mental disability that may come with that, and she denied him before for that, which is really unfortunate. However, he did have rights under the Fair Housing Act because he was denied for having an impairment that he did not have. Additionally, individuals with a record of such impairment are also included under a disability. It also calls out some types of disabilities that folks may not think of, but so any orthopedic, visual, hearing impairment, speech impairment, cerebral palsy, autism, epilepsy, cancer, heart disease, diabetes, HIV, emotional illness, drug addiction or alcoholism, but not currently using. Those are all considered disabilities under the Fair Housing Act. Excuse me. For people with disabilities, um, these are the types of things that we often see as allegations. So a refusal to rent or sell because the person has a disability. We've had cases where a person didn't want to rent to somebody because they were blind and they were worried about it was a home with multiple people, and they were worried about that person touching other people's food in the fridge. So they did not want to rent to that individual. Um, Being charged extra fees or a higher deposit or higher rent because you're a person with a disability, because they're a person with a disability. Oftentimes we can see this with disability related needs. So having maybe you're charged an extra fee because you live in a senior home and you have a motorized wheelchair. So you're charged extra fees just for having that, and it's independent living. That would be an issue. Another one we often see is being charged fees for emotional service animals, or assistance animals, or a higher deposit because of those. Being asked for a medical history to prove you have a disability, that is has big fair housing risk if you're ever asked for any type of medical history in an application process, or if to prove that you can live independently. Those are too often the types of things that people with disabilities experience, unfortunately. Refusal to rent because of disability-based income. So often complaints we've heard from housing providers is, well, I can't garnish it. So they don't want to rent to them, which is just really unfortunate. An unfortunate thing that people with disabilities have to endure, but they cannot be denied because of that. Denial of reasonable modifications or reasonable accommodations, which we will talk about next. So, if a person with a disability has a disability-related need, in addition, they can ask for a modification, which is a physical change to an apartment or a unit to make it more accessible. A person with a disability um, can ask for reasonable modifications to their personal unit or to public or common use areas if it's necessary for equal access. Some examples that we often hear about or see or understood are ramps, grab bars, widening doorways for people often in wheelchairs, so they don't bump their hands on the frames, maybe lowering kitchen cabinets, adjusting heights of outlets, thermostats, or altering a walkway. Often the reasonable modification and accommodation process is really led by the person with a disability. What is their need for them to have equal access and enjoyment of the unit? What is their disability related need? Has to be connected to the disability. Some examples here. The one on the left was actually a condo association or homeowners association who did not want to have a zero-step entry because it would change the aesthetics. They were worried that it would look ugly. That was honestly their um, only pushback for it. This case was a mother and her son who had no mobility, and she would carry him in and out of. He had a mobilized wheelchair, and she would carry, lift it from there to there. Every day to get him in and out of the house. But as he was getting bigger, his equipment was getting bigger, and it was getting more and more challenging for her. Um, and for him, I mean, he could have had the ability to do it himself as well. But having that zero-step entry really helped them be able to use and enjoy their home. And as you can see there is really no aesthetic displeasingness to it. It looks great. It still has a very similar aesthetic, except for there is a little step missing. And then on the right there, this one may be really hard to spot, but there is down here, hopefully you can see my mouse, there's a little beveled ridge right here. And this person was a person with a disability, and previously there was just a lip on the door. That bevel was not there. So there was a little lip in the entrance, and the person with the disability would have to or the person in the wheelchair would have to line themselves up with the door frame and launch themselves into the door frame to get over that lip. And as you could imagine, there was probably a lot of hurt knuckles and hands. So they didn't have equal access to their unit because they were in a wheelchair. And then we have reasonable accommodations, which are changes in any rule, policy, or procedure that is needed in order for a person with a disability to have equal access to their home. And for reasonable modifications, I'm going to back up here. The cost often falls on the tenant who is requesting it, unless there is federal funding at the property. So if they're a federal funded property, they would have to put that cost, that would go to the housing provider. However, there are some different for the modifications. There are some things that a housing provider can assess. Are they going to continue to use it moving forward? Would everyone enjoy it? There are some other things that, it's a maybe. It really just depends on the facts of the case and the situation. But generally, a tenant would have to pay for a modification if it is private housing. So the cost of the ramp, the cost of the grab bars. And a housing provider can request that those modifications be changed at the end of the lease as well. And they also have to be done in a workman-like manner. So they can't just be, I'm just going to drill a hole and put in this grab bar. It has to be done so it's structurally sound. And then for accommodations, the reason I bring that up is because accommodations often fall on the housing provider because it is their rules, their policies that they are offering or services they're offering that need to be accommodated for the person with a disability. So some examples would be if there is a no overnight guest rule and a person needs an overnight caregiver, they would have to be exempt from that policy or allowed to have that caregiver. If there is a no pets policy, a housing provider would have to allow an assistance animal. With that, which I know there's probably questions coming in about this, documentation can be requested if the disability is not visible, and it has to be done by a healthcare professional, or the documentation. Um, Additionally, there are a person could request an accessible parking space, especially if the policy is first come, first serve for parking. You know, if it's just an apartment complex with open parking and a person needs an accessible parking space in the front of their unit, separate from the ADA spaces, a person can request that if there's a disability related need. Another one is rent, the change in a rent date based upon the income that may be coming from disability related income, and late fees cannot be charged. So if a person with a disability receives their disability check on let's say the 6th of the month, and starting after the 3rd, if a person doesn't pay their rent, they accumulate late fees. Well, that person with a disability cannot pay rent any sooner because their check comes on the 6th. So they can request an accommodation to allow them to have their rental due date be the 6th because that's when they receive the money. And then, the standard process, if it was 3 days after, it'd be the 9th. After the 9th, they would accumulate um, late fees. Another one that we off can be requested is somebody being released from their lease penalty free because the housing no longer meets their needs. So this is kind of a last resort. So if there's no ability to do any modifications or changes to the unit, and the person just can no longer live there. Say they are on the 2nd floor and now they are in a wheelchair, and there's no ramp can be built. There's no, it would not be reasonable to ask a person to put in a elevator. And so, that the housing just no longer meets the person's needs. And so a person could request to be released from that lease without any penalty because their disability related need is they can't live there. In addition, if say there was a unit available on the 1st floor, that person could request a transfer to the unit or that floor because of their disability related need requires it. So again, with that same example, if there was a 1st floor unit, they could request to be transferred to that 1st floor unit without any fees associated with that. We do have lots of tools on this. So I did bring up assistance animals, and we may have some time at the end to answer any questions, but we do have resources specifically on assistance animals. We also have a training on our YouTube that covers assistance animals. So if you have questions on that, if you want to learn more about that, that information is available. We also have guidebooks available to both housing consumers and providers. It's the same information, just written for the lens of the person reading it. So these guidebooks help folks request accommodations and modifications in their housing for the housing consumers. It really allows to advocate for yourself and to get the things that you need first. And then if you're kind of experiencing those blockades, a housing provider is just like, nope, you can't put this ramp. Nope, you can't have an overnight guest, even though you've provided documentation and information to say, I do have a disability and a disability related need. That's when you can call us and we can help you with that. And advocate for you. Additionally, the guidebook, again, like I said, is written the same information to that housing provider, just how to process a request for an accommodation or modification. We also have sample support letters as examples, and then a sample assistance animal policy in there as well. Again, all these things can be found on our website, so feel free to check those out. So we're going to move into families with children. As mentioned, this protection is for the presence of children under the age of 18 or people that are pregnant. The family makeup can really be, a single parent. It could be grandparents raising grandchildren. It could be anybody that's in the process of obtaining custody or for foster families. It's very broad. It's really just that presence of children under the age of 18 in the home triggers that protection. Some examples that we see with fair housing implications is denying families or children to recreational facilities. Maybe the kids aren't allowed at all in the pool. That would be very concerning to us. That would have some fair housing risk. Imposing unreasonable rules because children are present or imposing rules specifically on children. We've seen rules where over the age of 14 is not allowed out after 6 p.m. That's really unreasonable, and it's really specific to an age group. That's just very concerning and would be something that we would want to look into and investigate. Extra fees per child or higher rents or deposits because of the presence of a child. This would be have some fair housing risk. Charging rent per bedroom in a single family home, imposing different standards based on the children's ages, restricting certain families to certain floors or areas of the complex. There has been cases where there are two apartment buildings, and one they put all the families in there and all the single people are in the other one, and that one is you're not allowed to do. But two, the other thing with that case was the housing for the families with children was also not maintained as well. So not only are you restricting them to a different area, but you're also having difference in treatment overall. We've also seen steering when it comes to families with children. There was a case where a housing provider actually reported it, and because they were receiving a lot of families with children applying to their complex, and they kind of asked why, and they were like, "Oh, the apartment complex down the street told me to apply here," and that was, raised some red flags with the housing provider that was receiving all of those applications and reported it, and to find out that the one down the road just didn't want families with children living there. And the last one there is placing a limit on the number of children within the home. So that kind of leads into that occupancy that I had brought up earlier. Occupancy is based on reasonable limits that come from local health and safety codes. We do have a guidebook, which I'll talk about in a moment, that kind of covers this further, but a housing provider really should calculate based on those standards, the local health and safety codes, and not have general standards or general rules like 2 people per bedroom, because it's not always in compliance. That used to be a standard when housing was built very similarly, but now because housing is built a lot of open floor plans, a lot of bigger bedrooms, things like that, there may be rooms may be able to accommodate more than just 2 people. Additionally, with occupancy, ads should really just state the property size and not the number of people that could fit in the unit. So it's a 2-bedroom, 1.5 bath. A housing provider could, once say you do or you have a bigger family and you're like, I've lived in a two-bedroom with six people before because the bedrooms were huge. So you apply to this place and this housing provider denies you because you don't fit their occupancy standards. And they say, oh, reasonable occupancy standards only allow up to five people to live here. They can do that because they've done the math. However, you can inquire and say, oh, was it not fit? I've lived in a two-bedroom, what was the occupancy standard for this? You can ask about that type of stuff if they don't provide you with that information. Um, so with occupancy, it cannot be blanket, and it really is based upon the size of the unit. Additionally, with families with children, we do see different rates also being offered based on the number of people who occupy it. And this does violate fair housing law. So if a housing provider or an ad states $1,000 for two people, but it's $50 more for each person, that shows that there's a penalty for having a bigger family, or for if there's been cases where it's $1,000 for one person and then it goes up from there. That would have an implication against marital status, things like that. Um, additionally with this, it's not in there, and I apologize, but utilities, we have seen that with families with children as well, as utilities are changing based on the number of people, with no without that backup, not without that bill from consumers. It's kind of just, oh, with each person is $50 more because of utilities. There's no actual, you know, factual evidence to say that's why. So I mentioned that guidebook there. This guidebook is really designed for housing providers. However, we wanted to make this available so folks know how occupancy is calculated. And there is a step-by-step guide in there. So I'm not going to go much deeper in this, but that is a resource available for folks. So we have another webinar here. This is the last one, and it's a common one we hear. You just moved into a unit. Soon after, you notice roaches. To make matters worse, the air isn't working. Your neighbors are having the same issues, and the manager keeps promising to make repairs for everyone, but nothing happens. Who do you call? United Way 211, legal aid, city or county government, Urban League or a tenants' rights organization, Fair Housing Center, or disability advocates. I'll give folks about 30 seconds. Alrighty. Give folks 10 more seconds to put in their answer. Alrighty. So, uh, despite everyone saying 75% of you saying to call the Fair Housing Center, unfortunately, we are not the call for this one, because everyone is equally being treated poorly. That is where oh, I'm not sharing results. Sorry about that. That is that is where fair can be subjective, and can really confuse people on what we do. Unfortunately, the housing provider is treating everyone equally poorly, so there's nothing that we can do. However, it is best if you did call us for this, we would happily give you the referral. Um, but the first call would probably be the city or the county government, because some of those are health issues and health concerns. The other one I would say is Urban League or a tenants' rights organization to help you with that tenant landlord piece of that issue. All right. That is our last poll. So I am going to kind of finish things up here on how to report and what that looks like and take any questions. And if we don't have time for them, please follow up with us, and we will make sure to get those answered for you. We take complaints anyway, phone, email, letter, fax. There is no cost for our services. They are free. We accept complaints anonymously, and we accept them from everyone. Anyone can make a fair housing allegation or complaint, not just people trying to obtain the housing. As I mentioned in one of my examples, the a housing provider can make it as well. We've had lenders, or not lenders, realtors make them. There's probably been lenders who make them as well. So anybody can make a fair housing complaint. We can work directly with potential clients if we have consent and authorization. All of our inquiries go through our intake coordinator. And if you do call our office and we do not pick up, please leave a voicemail. We only return voicemails because we get so many calls. So we do return voicemails. So please leave a voicemail if our intake coordinator does not get to you. We oftentimes she's on another call. Um, and we do what we can with the information we receive. However, the more information, the better, and the sooner we get the information, the better as well. We can only do so much with being a nonprofit, but we try to do everything we can within our power. As we know, the making a complaint through administratively through HUD or MDCR can be challenging, and working with lawyers can be challenging. So we always want to be your first call when you're experiencing housing discrimination, and we will do what we can. So when you file a complaint, there's a few different ways you can file it, and there's a statute of limitations connected as well. So at the federal level, if you file a complaint with HUD, the Housing Department of Housing and Urban Development, it has to be within a year of that occurring that you can make a complaint. If you want to take it to federal court, it's 2 years. In the state of Michigan, the Michigan Department of Civil Rights is the administrative process. It is 6 months or 180 days. And then to go to court is 3 years. However, if you are outside the statute of limitations, it just means that we can't, we can help you to an extent. We would really just want that information to then, investigate further to make sure it's not still happening with that particular housing provider. But there wouldn't be any outcomes on your case specifically, but you could be helping folks that may encounter that person in the future. And then, as mentioned, with harassment, retaliation across the board is covered. So it's not just with harassment. At any point, if you make a fair housing complaint on any of the protected bases, you cannot be retaliated against. Yeah. Some resolution that you may expect. So mediation. So that's just talking, mediating it between the two parties. Litigation. So going to court with either private attorneys, we have cooperating attorneys, or the Department of Justice. As I mentioned, administratively, you can file with HUD, the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, or the municipality. Often we see property rights secured if available. This housing market can be a little tight. So if the unit is already rented, unfortunately, it's rented, and there's not much that can be done to get that unit back. However, as you can see, there can be compensation. So if you had to pay a higher rent, maybe that could be a damage that is you receive compensation for, is that you're, $300 more rent because you missed out on that unit. Uh, Other things that we see are training that is provided to all of those involved, or changes in the policies. So how can you help? Remember what happened, record everything, as much evidence as you can provide. Knowing any other witnesses is really also helpful, or any other folks. That's sometimes how we get, or the best way we can get the comparative evidence, is that your neighbor next door was treated differently, and the only difference is your race, or that you have a disability. So things like that, that's really important to know as well. And then call, email, fax us, and we walk you through questions, or we walk you through, yeah, a series of questions. Another way we can investigate, say you do not have any evidence to say, I was denied this housing, or maybe I wasn't allowed to apply. You don't know anyone else that's applied, that maybe got, further in the application process than you. We do this thing called testing, which is an investigative tool to gather evidence. Testers simulate an ordinary housing transaction just to get credible, objective information. So it's just casually walking in, asking, do you have 2 bedrooms available? And they give you the information, they tell you how to apply, and things like that. And then you just bring that information back to our office, and we on the back end compare it to see that were you given the same information as your counterpart. It's used to investigate all types of housing, and it's often the basis for successful resolution. It's really a way to determine that all people are being given the same information, treatment, service, and access, without regard to any of the protected classes. Oftentimes, there are significant differences in the quality of service, the info requested by the tester, the info provided by the agent, and then the treatment overall. They gather evidence, testing investigations, gather evidence of discriminatory statements, practices, and policies. So here's an example here. This was a race-based test. Testers do not know what they're being tested on. So they just go in and ask, based on what the test requires them. And then they get the information and leave, and then they give it to us, and then we do the comparison. So both these testers did not know that the other one was testing. They both met with the same agent. However, they were given difference in availability. The black tester was also told that there was a wait list and it was long, but the white tester was not given that information. There was different rental rates. And then the checks, the specials, and other were also all, there was a difference there. That black tester in this instance was told there was a credit and a background check and an income check, where the white tester was only told there was a credit check. And the black tester also was not given any information on specials, or, the amenities around. That is really big concern. When housing providers are interacting in the process, all information should be given to everyone similarly. So that really wraps up our training here. We do have some other upcoming trainings, which you can find also on our website. And then I will now, and then that is our contact information. And then now I will take some questions.